Chapter 1, Sweet and Spicy Moments, Part 1. Chapter Text. /N. This story is an AU and does not follow the canon events from the movies and TV series, so don't be surprised to see things happening differently from what you know. Also, the dragons are super smart and can talk telepathically, so please don't have a fit when they start talking. Tongue-poking smiley. Connected to Dragons. Book 2 of the How to Light Up the Night series. Preface. Despite the odds against it, the undersized and not particularly inclined towards any of the normal Viking feats Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III won the heart and promised hand of the beauteous and very Valkyrie-like Astrid Horfason during his 14th summer. He also made his father see that the way he'd been sheltering him from a normal Viking life was actually detrimental to his future as Stoic the Vastser, thus starting a new and much healthier relationship between them. But that wasn't the only thing of note that happened to Hiccup that summer. Aside from himself and Astrid being the first ever Berkians to actually see a Night Fury, a secret they kept to themselves, they also spotted someone he was pretty sure was his supposedly deceased mother, and she was riding a dragon. Actually riding it. And the dragon didn't seem to mind. This changed everything Hiccup and Astrid had thought they knew about dragons, but they couldn't tell anyone. Especially not Hiccup's stubborn and set in his ways father. Because the island of Berk was at war with the dragons, and trying to change centuries of ingrained instincts born into a Viking would be like trying to change the tide. But what if something happened with the previously glimpsed Night Fury to inspire such a miracle? Prologue. 15 years. Hiccup sighed in contentment as he stared up at the fluffy clouds floating across the cerulean sky from his bed of fresh spring grass located at the edge of the training meadow and beside the cliff overlooking the gently lapping sea that caressed the rocks below in a soothing melody. With one arm folded under his head and the other tucked across Astrid's torso as she used his chest as a pillow, and his fingers tangled in the silk of her long golden locks, he was as comfortable as he could possibly get with his world at the moment. The warm sun countered the still chilly air that hadn't quite made up its mind to give up winter, making even that pleasant and agreeable, and lulling him into a sleepy state like it already had to Astrid. She hummed in drowsy pleasure as his hand idly stroked through her hair, both untangling and tangling as it went. "Wake me when the sun starts to set," she murmured as she turned from lying on her back and TD to his body to lying on her side and snuggling up tight to him. Her head moved up to his shoulder and she wrapped an arm around his chest and even threw a leg over his crossed at the ankle ones. Using his arm to help hold her there, Hiccup smiled as he kissed the top of her head. "Of course, lady," he whispered quietly back. Astrid hummed again in thanks and then he felt her chest expand against him followed by her breaths becoming slow and even. His smile, already firmly fixed in the loving category, grew sappy as well as he gazed at her resting face. The way her pale eyelashes cast shadows on her cheeks always enchanted him. Not to mention the way her lips relaxed in slumber to part ever so slightly. They were also somewhat fuller than normal at the moment, thanks to their enthusiastic kisses that had led to them tumbling down into the grass maybe an hour ago. Kisses that had led to them going just a little bit further in their slowly escalating comfort zone of intimacy, much to his surprise and eager enjoyment. Hiccup had spent the 8 long months of winter growing, training, eating to fuel the first 2, designing and making a few new inventions, making plans to capture a dragon to try and tame on the sly, and best of all, spending nearly all of his time with Astrid while he did those things, all while kissing and touching each other as often as they could get away with. Even if it was just to hold hands or to hug chastely when in the watchful eyes of others. Which meant that their already comfortable relationship was now even more so. He was now almost a whole inch taller than her instead of 2 inches shorter, and he'd put on enough muscle so that he could no longer be accused of trying to impersonate a twig. A slender branch maybe, but not a twig. Astrid was pretty sure he'd always be lean compared to a normal Viking, though, but they were both okay with that, considering she was as well and Hiccup couldn't actually picture himself wanting to be as bulky as someone like Fish Legs. He liked being agile and fast, thank you very much. Besides, Astrid liked him more for his intelligence than his body. Not that she didn't do a fine job of appreciating both, though. Sweet and Spicy Moments, Part 1. Approximately 1 hour earlier. It was only their second training session of the year outside instead of cooped up in the Great Hall, that you just couldn't get the funk of sweaty bodies to dissipate from no matter what they did, spacious as it was, and Hiccup had enjoyed it immensely. Especially the watching Astrid kick everyone else's butts part. Even his own, but he was okay with that. It never got old seeing Snotlout lose to a girl. Ever. And the twins, well, let's just say that Hiccup didn't mind seeing them hit the ground either after all the pranks they'd pulled on him over the years. Once everyone else had left them, most sending knowing looks over their shoulders as he and Astrid lingered, the girl dropped the quiver of used arrows she'd been pretending to inspect with a muttered, "Finally." Then Astrid pulled his new all-in-one shield out of his hands and tossed it beside the quiver and then grabbed his hand to lead him over to the edge of the cliff. She then stood with her eyes closed and her arms out, letting the sea breeze dry the last of the sweat on her brow and the sunshine on her face. "Thor, I love spring. Isn't it glorious, Hiccup?" she asked, eyes still closed. "It sure is," he'd agreed huskily, looking only at the beautiful gift from the gods that was his fiancée. Astrid, catching his tone, opened her eyes and turned her head to look at him knowingly as she gave up trying to catch the wind with her hands. "You know, babe, I'm going to end up with an ego as big as this island if you keep complimenting me like that indefinitely." Hiccup only shrugged. "So be it. Only more of you to love, I say." His goddess rolled her eyes and punched him in the arm. "Well, stop it." He raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Seriously?" She thought about it for all of 3 seconds and then smirked at him. "No." Hiccup chuckled and pulled her close with an arm behind her slender waist. "I didn't think so, my fair, in more ways than one, lady." Her smirk increased in depth as Astrid wrapped her arms around his neck and she stepped even closer into his body so they were pressed together from chest to thighs. Her gorgeous big blue eyes sparkled as she looked up at him, that one little fraction that made him rejoice every time because it used to depressingly be the other way around. "And what ways would those be?" she asked coyly. Hiccup wrapped his other arm around her and pulled lightly on the thick braid hanging down her back. "Well, there's this. Thy locks doth glimmer like the fairest field of wheat in the sun." A good start, my poetic one," she said teasingly, her own fingers now delving into his hair and petting his scalp in the way that made delicious shivers run down his spine. "What else?" Now on a roll with what he'd started, Hiccup grinned. "Thy temperament is as fair as the ocean, both in the generosity of thy heart and the ruthlessness of thy temper." Astrid laughed. "Very true." He nuzzled his nose into the sweet spot below her ear, making her giggle as he knew she would, and then he whispered, "Thy mirth is like the fairest of bells to mine ears. Thy skill as a warrior is decidedly more than passing fair and arouses me to the heights of fair delight." He scattered soft kisses from her ear to her the corner of her mouth, moving his hands as he did so that he was cupping her face and could capture her gaze. "And lastly, thy visage is the most fair of all the maidens in the known land, unchallenged and worshipped by this unworthy, besotted swain." "Oh," Hiccup, she said with her melting heart shining in her eyes and her fingers tightening in his hair. "You are so far beyond worthy of my love, it hurts sometimes." Then she tugged his head to hers and kissed him. His lips copied her sweet sincerity as the kiss gradually got hotter and deeper and his heart sang a deep bass tune of, "She loves me. She loves me. She loves me," in his chest. When she eventually pulled back enough for them to gasp for air and stare at each other with adoring eyes, she added, "And I think I want to show you how much." While he had no clue what that meant, Hiccup was 100% on board with whatever it was. He shrugged slightly and kissed her nose teasingly. "Whatever lady wishes." "Good," she grinned, then hooked her leg behind his and toppled him to the grass. The fact that his head was nearly hanging off the edge of the cliff when he was done falling didn't really register because she fell right down with him, landing on his body, and had her mouth plastered to his again almost before the air even had a chance to leave his lungs in a whoosh. Astrid got all his oxygen, which made her pull back so he could gasp in a few more lungfuls while she laughed at him. "Sorry, babe." "That's okay," he wheezed back as he wrapped his arms and legs around her and rolled them over away from the cliff. His survival instincts weren't completely AWOL, despite how she made his head spin. He planted his hands on either side of her head and let his hips settle as close as comfortably possible with her spike-covered skirt and skull-decorated belt between them. "Talk about your inventive chastity belts." He gave her a cheeky grin. "I didn't need that air anymore anyway. I can survive on just you." Then he proceeded to show her by kissing her for several long and delightful minutes while their chests rubbed against each other and she twined her legs around his to hold him even closer. The spikes on her skirt dug into him through his clothes, but he honestly didn't care much anymore. The sounds of delight that escaped from her throat only fed the fire in his blood. Eventually, as they rolled onto their sides so he could wrap his arms around her, he left her mouth to trail kisses down her neck, sucking lightly on the spot that made her whimper his name. But not for long, so she didn't end up with a mark of evidence for her father to glower at him for. Been there, done that, didn't want to die, thank you. Meanwhile, one of his hands had been sliding down the line of her back so that he could pull her top out from under her belt and sneak underneath so he could feel the satin of her skin against his much rougher fingers. Astrid's warm little hands were under his tunic too, just as calloused as his from years of wielding various weapons, but softer nonetheless. Her blunt nails dug into his back as he moved to the other side of her neck to give it the same treatment. Gods, hiccup, she gasped. More, he murmured against her soap and sweat-infused skin. Yes. His other hand joined the first at the bottom of her tight-fitting green shirt and he pushed it up as he slid down her body and nudged her onto her back again. He smiled at the tight line of her stomach, faintly dented with abdominal muscles, and leaned down to kiss her just above her navel. My strong Valkyrie. Her hand slid around under his tunic to rest on his shoulders as he kissed his way up from there, pushing her shirt up and out of the way as he went. Soon enough, he encountered the strip of cloth wound around her breasts a few times and then tucked in to keep them contained and less obvious and pushed that up as well, revealing her delightful little hand-sized bounties to his appreciative eyes. So beautiful. He used one hand under her to arch her back a little, and the other settled on her right breast as he nuzzled and kissed his way all over her left one. The way her nipple stabbed up into his palm as he kneaded her soft flesh let him know he was doing something right. Her other nipple pointed too as he laved attention to it with his tongue. He took a moment to ask, good. One of her hands slid out from under his tunic and grasped his hair to push his face a fraction closer to her chest. You know it is. He smiled against her skin, because he did know. She'd shown him not that long ago that his own tiny nipple seemed to like attention from fingers and lips just as much as hers did. She must have reminded herself of that fact, because the next thing he knew, the hand she still had under his tunic was teasing his nipples in turn. Hiccup inhaled sharply as sensation rushed straight from his chest to his groin, making him even harder, if that had even been possible. Not long after that, Astrid looked down at him and tugged him up by his hair so his mouth reluctantly left her breast and he focused on her. I want to try something new today, if that's okay with you. Hiccup's heart stuttered a beat and then thumped harder. I already said whatever you wish, Astrid. My body is yours. She smiled at him sweetly. Just double-checking. Then she had him on his back quicker than a blink and her mouth was attached to his again as her hand trailed down the sensitized skin of his chest slowly but determinedly. It was about the time when she reached his belt and undid it that it finally clicked in his fuzzy mind what her intended destination was. Holy Thor! Is she actually going to? Odin's frozen balls, she is. Hiccup gasped into her tongue-filled kiss as her hand slid under his trousers and undershorts to boldly grasp his straining erection. As she carefully slid her hand up and down, exploring and pleasuring him at the same time, she finally pulled back a fraction to whisper against his mouth, "Your sword is quite impressive, babe, so soft yet so hard. Long and thick and as finely crafted as everything you make. It even feels alive in my hand." Hiccup pried his eyes open to gaze into hers for a moment while he all but twitched and shuddered to death at her touch and words, his length straining up towards his abdomen in new records of achieved arousal. It certainly has a mind of its own, I can vouch for that. With their more adventurous and close embraces of the last few months, she couldn't have failed to notice that exact thing, which is why she giggled and touched her forehead to his. I noticed. And I'm sure you noticed that I didn't mind. He had. There was once a time when she'd deliberately kept their hips as far apart as possible while still being close to him. Now she actually ground against him on occasion, sometimes to the point of driving him absolutely insane with pleasure pain as that blasted spiked skirt got in the way. She rubbed him a little faster, every one of her fingers leaving permanent memories on his skin to recall later as they caressed him just hard enough. He shuddered even more when she rubbed her thumb over his head, spreading the weeping precum around with a curious purr from her throat. You leak too, I didn't know. Wait. Too. Does that mean she leaks with arousal as well? Oh gods. Maybe she'll let me find out soon. Please, Thor, please, let me find out soon. Will you release for me, hiccup, she said after kissing him again. I want to see it. Of course, he gasped. As if I could stop it now. Anything lady wishes, after all. She smiled at him, kissed him quickly once more, and then slid down his body. She used her free hand to push his tunic up to his armpits and his trousers and undershorts halfway down his ass so that most of his shaft was visible to the sky. Oh, wow, she exclaimed. I didn't expect it to be so colorful. Hiccup tilted his head forwards for a second to see that he was indeed nearing a reddish purple at the tip. Then he thumped his head back against the grass and closed his eyes tight again as he tried not to explode just yet. He wanted to savor this as long as he could. That's all you're doing, he managed through gritted teeth. I swear I'm in a near-permanent state of arousal whenever I watch you train, or am near you, or even better yet, when you're kissing me. Astrid laughed, her hand still moving steadily up and down with a sweep at his crown every once in a while. He'd leaked enough by now that her way was slick and easy. I can't say the same, but I always knew that girls had more sense than boys. It's a wonder you ever get anything done. He cracked his eyes open again to see her smirking at him, the halo of the sun-infused blue sky behind her head making her look like an angel. A wicked angel, but an angel nonetheless. You get used to it after a while. I guess. She shrugged. Not that you don't turn me on, babe, don't think that. It's more that I have to let myself get in the mood first. I definitely don't have any bits with a mind of their own. He gave a strangled laugh. I think the right answer here is, I should hope not. Otherwise we might have to rethink this whole getting married thing. She snorted and punched him in the arm. He was so used to it that it didn't deter the state of his erection at all. Are you going to release soon? Hiccup sighed. Always eager to get things done as fast and efficiently as possible. So much for drawing this out. Yeah. Yeah, I am. Just, go a little faster and harder. And maybe twist a little at the top. She shot him a look for the rather specific instructions, but hey, she wanted him to come right away, so he was just helping her along. Astrid did what he said, though, without comment, and he groaned in pleasure as everything in him tightened in readiness for the explosion to come. 30 seconds of sweet bliss later, he moaned out, Gods. I'm. Ugh. Her hand never left him, and kept stroking helpfully as he shot warm seed up onto his stomach and torso in multiple splatters. Oh, wow, Astrid murmured. So much. I'm impressed again. Hiccup didn't care that his pride in that was probably a stupid thing. All he cared at the moment was feeling the last tremors of sensation work up and down his spine as he regained the ability to breathe. Her hand left him, which he both mourned and was grateful for, and he heard the sound of ripping grass. He somehow found the energy to tilt his head up and watched her wipe him clean with bunches of grass and then throw them over the edge of the cliff and into the sea far below. Thanks, he said as his head thudded back down and he closed his eyes again. The pleasure of orgasm was awe-inspiring and so worth it, but he always felt half dead afterwards. Astrid fixed his pants, belt, and tunic and then turned so she could lie down with her head on him as a pillow, moving his arm so that his hand rested just under her breasts as she did so. His eyes popped open and he was greeted with the sight of the sky as another thought occurred to him. Hey. What about you? I can't be the only one having an orgasm in front of the other person for the first time here. You're not. What? Her words and soft laugh had him craning his head upwards and to the side. And then his eyes nearly popped out of his head because she had her skirt pushed to the side and her hand buried inside her dark leggings and he could see her fingers moving over the secrets of her female parts. Holy fuck. This day just keeps getting better and better. Hiccup quickly propped his head up with his previously sprawled arm to save his neck and watched her with eager eyes, memorizing for future endeavors what he could discern of how she brought herself pleasure. His tired prick even twitched with renewed enthusiasm at the show. You can touch my breasts while I do this, Astrid said, turning her head and smiling at him tentatively, showing she wasn't quite as confident in their new degree of intimacy as she was letting on. Of course he wanted to touch her, but if it made her feel uncomfortable. Are you sure? Yes, she said firmly, grabbing his hand and putting it on her breast. Trust me, this will make me feel even better. Okay, he breathed in awe as he caressed her breasts in turn, kneading the way she liked and circling her nipples until they stood in points again. She smiled at him gratefully, and then her eyes closed as she concentrated on what she was doing to herself. He really wished her leggings weren't blocking his view, but he figured she would have pushed them down if she was ready for him to see that, so he didn't say anything. Instead, he split his attention between watching her hand, his hand on her pretty breasts, and the captivating expressions on her face as her breathing slowly changed to short gasps. And then she was biting her lip and her back arched slightly as her entire body tensed for maybe 5 seconds. She'd barely made a sound, which he could understand if she was used to pleasuring herself in a house where sound carried easily. Been there, done that too. That's it. He wondered. Female orgasms seem less intense than male ones, that's for sure. Maybe I'm missing something that I can't see. Oh well. At least she looks happy. And she did. Astrid was smiling at him, her eyes heavy-lidded, as she removed her hand and fixed her skirt. Then she gently pulled his hand off her breast and wriggled her support cloth and shirt back into place before encouraging him to wrap his arm around her again. They just smiled at each other rather stupidly and shyly for a while until she finally said, "That was nice." Understatement. His smile widened. It was, wasn't it? She laughed softly as their usual ease with each other was restored. Yes, it really was. Sighing happily, she turned her head and looked up at the clouds. Totally doing this again tomorrow. Hiccup's heart jumped with joy. No argument from me. He tugged the binding off the bottom of her braid so he could run his fingers through her hair absently, one of his favorite things to do, and looked up at the sky too. Love you, Astrid. She glanced at him, her expression soft and content. Love you too, Hiccup. Chapter 2, Sweet and Spicy Moments, Part 2. Chapter text. /N, I guess I should warn you that this chapter contains lemons of the furry variety. If that's not your thing, feel free to skip. The plot of the story develops after this chapter. Sweet and Spicy Moments, Part 2. It was the first ray of morning sunlight penetrating their cave that woke up Luna as it shone on her face and warmed her thick scales. This was completely by design, of course, since she liked to wake with the sun as it peeked over the horizon like a baby dragon emerging from its shell. Luna loved the colors in the sky. The pinks and reds and oranges of the reflecting clouds against the brilliant blue. She also loved to watch the sun set for the same reasons, but Toothless always joined her for that. It was their evening cuddle time that often led to tongue-entangling kisses and playtime amongst the colored clouds. But the sunrise. The sunrise was hers to enjoy on her own. Because her mate liked to sleep in and she didn't mind letting him. She figured he might as well enjoy his last days of peace and quiet while he could, because she could feel changes happening in her body and she knew that their first mating cycle was going to happen soon. Very soon. And then there would be children to take care of and get crawled all over by at all times of the night or day, leaving their idyllic time of solitude and doing whatever they wanted far behind. Luna touched her nose to Toothless where it rested right beside hers in a gentle display of affection before she slithered out from under his enveloping wing. Standing, she stretched out her back and wings, starting by leaning over her front legs and finishing by making her tail stick straight out. Sighing as all the kinks from lying unmoving for hours worked themselves out, she then made for the mouth of the cave. If there was a bit more of a slink to her step than normal, she blamed it on the slow-burning heat building in her blood and the heated emotions coming from her human girl that seeped through their mental connection even when Luna was asleep. Astrid and her boy sure are frisky lately, she thought with an amused huff as she left the cave and drank in the glorious morning sky in front of her. They don't seem to have heat cycles like we do, but that doesn't seem to be stopping them from progressing their relationship closer and closer to the ultimate joining. Toothless and I are still going to get there first, though. Even if he doesn't know it yet. Boy's gonna be real surprised when he wakes up, she added with a silent snigger, bounding across the sand and diving into the cool lake water for a necessary dunking. Within minutes, as she swam around and caught fish for their breakfast, it felt like her scales were starting to itch and her blood had turned to lava in her veins. It didn't take long before the sensations became nearly unbearable and she came to the conclusion that what meager breakfast she'd managed to catch would just have to be enough. Great dragon. Mother told me mating heat was intense, but I didn't think it would be this bad. she bemoaned as she literally flew out of the water and back to the cave. Luna galloped the few steps back to Toothless still curled up and sleeping form and promptly regurgitated his half of the fish. Then she smacked him in the head with her tail to wake him up while mentally calling in something only half a degree less than a shout, "Toothless! Get up! It's time!" Her mate, curse him, only blinked his eyes half open, and looked at her with zero understanding. "Time for what, my much too energetic love?" Luna growled in her throat. "Some days, I swear I'm going to eat him for breakfast. Time to mate. Can't you sense it?" Then, finally, the Night Fury got it. His eyes widened almost to the point of popping out and he was suddenly on his feet and running around in circles in front of her. "Oh my dragon! Oh my dragon! Oh my dragon! Yes I can! Yes I can! Yes I can!" Toothless came to a stop in front of her, sides heaving and mouth gaping as he gasped for air. His nostrils widened as he breathed in her scent and she swore his eyes almost rolled up into his head as he swayed on his feet. "By the stars in the sky, Luna, you smell amazing. I could lick you all over." Later she purred, not opposed to something that was enjoyable, but also something they'd done before. Her body wanted so much more than that right now. "But first, eat your fish. You're going to need your strength." "Okay." The mental thought was accompanied by a hilarious squeak. And then Toothless swallowed hard, his eyes never leaving hers as he lowered his head to do as she commanded. While her night-colored mate slurped up his breakfast, Luna walked around him, rubbing her body against his and caressing him with her tail. The friction felt delicious to her scales, inspiring a loud purr to erupt in her throat. It also made him forget how to swallow, because poor Toothless actually choked on a fish and had to cough it back out before he could swallow it properly. "Careful, sweetie," she chided gently. "I need you alive for this." "Yes, my fluff cloud," he replied, swallowing the last fish with extreme care and then turning his head to watch her progress as she made her third trip around his quivering and aroused body. "I'd hate for you to have to seek out another dragon." "I'd hate that too, love," she thought back as she finished her circuit around him by using her tail to gently close his gaping mouth. His forked tongue re-emerged only a second later as he continued to pant, drinking in her scent on the air and still looking like he would pass out from that alone. How do you want to do this?" he asked as she led him outside and onto the sandy beach where they'd be more comfortable than the stone floor of the cave. That was a good question. And something Luna had been thinking about for weeks now as winter turned into spring and their mating grew nearer. "Honestly, Toothless, I want to try everything we can possibly think of." He almost fell on his face beside her, her answer apparently causing him to forget how to walk. Laughing softly to herself and pretending she hadn't seen that for his pride's sake, she continued, "But I think for our first time, I want to try the traditional position." And thus, fitting action to words, Luna lay on her belly on the sand and raised her tail up and to the side, exposing her needy cloaca where eggs had already started the process of forming deep within her. Toothless had been patiently, sort of, waiting for this day since pretty much from the first moment he'd met Luna. Unfortunately for male dragons who were always horny and had to control the urge lest their mates kill them for unwanted advances, the females only went into heat once a year. Logically, this made sense so that they weren't overrun with offspring. But biologically, Toothless wished they were more like humans, who got to be fully intimate whenever they felt like it and still only produce an average of one offspring per year. And even that seemed to be rare. Maybe humans just weren't very fertile, unlike dragons, who were too much so. Though he never could figure out why dragons couldn't mate between heat cycles. If the female wasn't growing any eggs at the time, or was already carrying fertilized eggs, why couldn't they join more often? When he'd asked his father that question during the mating rules talk, Longwing hadn't had an answer for that either. It didn't help his already raging hormones much when he tapped into Hiccup's mind and found the boy thinking of sex yet again. So Toothless had been sort of avoiding the teenager's thoughts lately, only peeking into his mind every once in a while to make sure the boy still had no plans to reveal that he'd seen a Night Fury on the island they called Berk. The one good thing Toothless had picked up from Hiccup's thoughts was the concept of self-pleasuring to ease the ache. This, he did when he was off hunting so that Luna didn't realize that he was just a horny teenager too. To her, he wanted to seem as mature as possible. And in this very moment, that meant not just leaping on her back and thrusting into her winking hole like a complete jerk. So Toothless forced his trembling limbs to walk up beside her, then he knelt on his knees and licked her face in his best version of dragon kisses. "Thank you for choosing me as your mate, Luna." She nuzzled him back, blue eyes both soft and burning within a fire. "You're welcome, Toothless. Now do something about this ache in me before I pin you to the sand and do it myself." He panted at the mental image she sent with that, his arousal jumping up a few more degrees and cock-weeping fluid in anticipation. "We can do that next if you want." She looked at him sideways, her bell-like laughter filling his mind. "Sure, babe. Now stop talking and do something." Spurred into action, Toothless carefully settled himself over her back, standing high on his toes so he didn't crush her with his greater weight. Then he made some cautious adjustments with his hips until he could feel her entrance with the sensitive tip of his long, pointed cock that thickened decidedly towards the base. He then gently bit her neck to hold her still and remind her who the dominant one was here ready. "Yes," she hissed back, wriggling under him slightly. Taking her at her word, Toothless tightened the grip of his teeth and thrust into her whole full length. They made nearly identical trilling sounds of pleasure. Because she was tight and hot and his cock had never known such incredible pleasure. And she. Well, her thought was explanation enough. Stars, Toothless. That feels so perfect and right. So incredibly full. Toothless continued his trill of bliss as his cock throbbed and vibrated within her channel, no extra thrusting motions necessary to stimulate their overly sensitive reproductive organs. When her channel suddenly tightened even further on him and pulsed around his length as she cried his name in his mind, Toothless lost it too, his seed erupting from his tip in heavy spurts that filled her egg-filled womb to bursting. Self-pleasuring had never felt this good. And after this heat cycle was over, Toothless wasn't sure he'd be willing to settle for just that for another year. "Maybe we could be the first dragons to try something different. I'll talk to her about it later," he thought determinedly as he let go of her neck and dismounted her. "You okay?" he asked, nuzzling her cheek. She looked at him with heavy-lidded eyes. Better. But I'm not done with you yet." He grinned, tongue lolling out the side of his mouth. "I should hope not. You've been teasing me for forever. You have a long way to go to make up for that." She growled playfully, rising to her feet and stretching out her wings for a moment. "Oh, I do I?" And with that, she pounced on him, pushing him onto his back. Toothless was already hard again and ready for her when she impaled herself on him and twined their tails together. And then she made it even better by doing the tongue-kissing thing that they'd learned from their human counterparts. He decided then and there that kissing and purring and vibrating officially made the world go round. The Night and Light Furies mated for the entire day, only taking short 10-minute naps on occasion or getting a drink of water before the urge to mate drove them back together again. They took turns being on top, but never again not face to face. Not only was that more comfortable, it was also more personal as they stared into each other's eyes or kissed until they came. And as the last of Luna's residual heat faded and the sky darkened to star-speckled black, they rose up into the air to dance amongst the clouds with their bodies connected and their hearts and souls soaring even higher than their wings could take them. An unbreakable bond was cemented that day as they affirmed their love for each other. Which was good, because they would need it to carry them through the trials to come. Chapter 3, Beginning of the Quest. Chapter Text. Beginning of the Quest. 2 days later. Stoic paused as he moved to walk off the ship and pick up another barrel of supplies. Looking up, he frowned so deeply in resigned confusion as he watched his son roll some sort of weird contraption down the wooden pathways that lined the cliff face and led down to the dock that his mouth all but disappeared into his beard and mustache. Hiccup was using his not very considerable body weight to counter the effects of gravity on whatever he'd decided to bring on the fishing trip, and Stoic could only watch the disaster waiting to happen with bated breath. Without taking his eyes off the precarious situation slowly making its way down to the docks, he nudged Gobber, who was currently recoiling some rope left in a messy heap on the deck of his new longship from some lazy ass that was going to get their ass kicked when he found out who the culprit was, in the side with a sharp elbow. His longtime friend only grunted out a, "What?" between muttered curses, not taking his eyes off his task. Stoic nudged Gobber again. Harder. What in Thor's name is my son doing with whatever that is? Gobber looked up as the last coil of rope settled at his feet well, boot and peg, along the rail of the Revenger, named in honor of the last ship that a Repreka destroyed a few weeks ago during their first fishing foray of the spring. He grinned at the sight, much to Stoic's disgust. Oh, that's the invention Hiccup's been working on and fidgeting with all winter. Surely he's told you about it. The Viking chief grimaced and rubbed the back of his thick neck in discomfort. Well, he might have. I tend to tune him out when he's talking about scientific stuff I don't understand. Gobber snorted. I do that too, sometimes. But this one, you shoulda listened to. It's supposed to work sorta like a harpoon or bowler or something, but catches dragons instead of killing them. Hiccup's on a mission to catch himself a dragon. Stoic blinked at this startling piece of news, actually taking his eyes off of Hiccup's progress to gawk at his second-in-command. What in the world for? The other man shrugged. He never actually said. But I assumed it was to provide a dragon for the training arena that starts in 2 weeks to prove himself to be a worthy Viking to Hector, who's still giving his future son-in-law glares of disapproval when he thinks no one's looking. Stoic growled as he clenched his massive fists. I'll show him a glare of disapproval. I thought Hector got over his snit about Hiccup and Astrid's engagement. Only when you're not around. An even deeper growl worthy of their dragon adversaries emerged from the huge Viking's chest, which inspired Gobber to quickly tack on, but I'm sure it wouldn't matter who was engaged to Astrid. I think Hector's just unhappy that his baby girl is growing up and doing adult things. Stoic's thundercloud expression cleared and a rumbling chuckle emerged instead as he returned to watching Hiccup fight with the contraption on the long route down the cliff. Ah. Now that, I can understand. Last time I caught them snogging with their hands very much under each other's shirts, I told Hiccup he was lucky he was a boy, otherwise he'd be wearing a chastity belt and probably a locked-on chest plate as well. Gobber's jaw dropped and then he was guffawing loud enough to draw the attention of the crews readying the other 2 longships as well. What? He choked out a couple more laughs before getting enough control to ask, what did the kids say to that? Stoic grinned. Not much, other than, "Da'ad," from Hiccup, and they both turned a brilliant bright red. They didn't so much as look at each other for the entire training session. It was great. Hiccup was even concentrating on what he was doing for once. Gobber was still chuckling fiendishly to himself when Hiccup finally pushed the sort of cannon-like contraption up the loading ramp and onto the longship. Panting and looking rather sweaty and about 2 steps away from falling over, the teenager raised an eyebrow at his father. What's got into Gobber? This, of course, set Stoic off into his own round of robust chuckles that left no room for answers, making Hiccup roll his eyes and mutter, "They are just as bad as the twins, I swear," as he trudged back down the ramp. Stoic and Gobber looked at each other and said at the exact same time, "No, we're not." Magically overhearing, as women were wont to do thanks to a trick of the breeze or whatever, Alga yelled from the next ship over, "Yes, you are. And maybe we should stick chastity belts on the men. More work would get done around here, that's for dang sure." Gobber, Stoic, and basically every male in hearing distance, including her husband and Hiccup, froze, and then, as one, they all turned to look at Astrid's mother with huge, alarmed eyes. Stoic sucked in a breath and then bellowed back, "No way in hell's frozen underworld, woman." Alga shot him a cheeky grin across the narrow expanse of water. "We'll see." Stoic turned his gaze to Hector standing beside his wife and looking like he'd just been stabbed in the back, and mouthed, "Do something," as soon as the other man could tear his astonished eyes off of his wife. The Viking with many braids in his long ash-blonde hair stared at Stoic with a blank expression for a moment or 3 and then he brightened and mouthed back, "Right." He then turned and scooped Alga up and over his shoulder, inspiring a screech from the blonde Vikingess. "Put me down." "What in Thor's name are you doing, Hector?" Hector patted his wife's generously rounded bottom currently on display in tight grey leggings only, thanks to her flipped-up leather skirt. He met Stoic's eyes and then winked before telling her, "I'm going to prove to you exactly why chastity belts on the men is a terrible idea." Oh, the woman more or less moaned as Hector strode down the ramp of their longship and onto the dock. Hiccup was still frozen, staring at his fiancée's parents with goggle eyes as they passed him. Stoic nudged Gobber again and whispered, "I don't know about you, old friend, but I'm both insanely jealous of Hector right now and very glad she's not my wife. Agreed, Gobber said with a slow nod of his head. That woman is a Spitfire harpy. And her daughter's just like her. Stoic watched his son slowly walk up the wooden pathway, eyes fixed firmly on the planks and not on the couple preceding him, whose hands were wandering already. Sometimes, I wonder if Hiccup actually knows what he's signed up for. Gobber shrugged. If he doesn't know by now, he'll find out eventually. Thor's toes. Hiccup thought as he made his way back up to the village to pack a bag for the fishing trip and say goodbye to Astrid. There are definite disadvantages to actually knowing what the adults are getting up to in the bedroom. Now all I can picture is Hector bending Alga over their table or something and giving it to her hard until she cries, I was wrong. The men should never wear chastity belts. Gods. Now I'm all horny and it's me bending Astrid over. Bad, Hiccup. Bad. Quick, think of something gross. Snotlout picking his nose. Weak old stew. That Snoggletog drink Astrid made last year. Ugh, that was gross. Yep. That worked. Shaking his head at himself, Hiccup wasn't surprised to see Astrid practically explode out of her house about 5 seconds after her parents entered it. Spotting him on the path further down the row of arch-shaped wooden houses, she jogged over to him. Gods, Hiccup. I don't know what's gotten into my parents, but Dad just told me to get out of the house as he deposited my giggling mother on the counter and they were snogging already by the time I got to the front door. Hiccup grimaced in sympathy, but was somewhat mollified to know that his imagination hadn't been exactly right. Made it less gross somehow. Yeah, you probably don't want to know, he said as he turned towards his house further up the hill and she fell into step beside him. Astrid shot him a disgusted look. Oh, come on. You know you can't say that and not expect me to not want to know. That was stupid of me, wasn't it? Fine, Hiccup huffed, and explained what he'd overheard and seen at the docks. A minute later, as he held the door of his house open for her, Astrid was looking at him with the same goggle-eyed expression of holy yak he'd been wearing not too long ago. You don't think all that started because of what your father said to us a few weeks ago, do you? Undoubtedly, Hiccup muttered as he closed the door behind them with a touch more force than necessary. The good news is that they were so occupied with laughing themselves silly, Dad didn't even have a fit about me bringing the dragon catcher aboard. Astrid had followed him up the stairs to his loft bedroom and now she sat down on the edge of his bed. I still think it's doubtful you'll be able to catch anything with that. Especially at sea. Oh, ye of little faith, Hiccup said with a teasing roll of his eyes as he went to his wardrobe and stuffed a couple changes of undershorts and socks into a leather bag. On top of that went his pencils and some blank paper from his desk in case he felt like sketching. I have just as good a chance out there as I do sitting here in Berk. Maybe better even, since the dragons have a habit of trying to steal our catch before we get home with it. Hiccup scanned his desk and room, looking for other things that might be useful and ended up adding his collapsible spyglass, a small toolkit, a spare knife, and just for the heck of it, in case winter decided to make a reappearance or something with a sudden drop in temperature, an extra sweater. Astrid leaned back on her hands, watching him with amused blue eyes. I suppose you're right, she eventually said. Of course I'm right, Hiccup shot her a cheeky grin, then looked around his room one more time. Finding nothing more to add, he closed the bag and set it at the top of the stairs. Then he settled on the bed facing her, one leg folded up on the bed and the other foot on the floor, studying her face and not liking the serious expression she was wearing. I sense a but here. Astrid shifted so she was mirroring him. Because there is one. I have a bad feeling about this trip, Hiccup. I spent all of last night tossing and turning, imagining your ship getting sucked under by another Repreca, or you getting pulled right off the boat by whatever dragon you're trying to catch, or an early hurricane popping up out of nowhere and capsizing your longboat, or Thor. Hiccup pulled her into his arms before she could name any more disasters. SHHHHHHHH. I'll be fine, he said reassuringly as he stroked a hand down her blonde braid in a soothing motion, gently pushing her head into his shoulder as she sank into him and wrapped her arms around his torso. The odds of any of that happening is almost nil. Dad's already promised everyone that we're going to avoid the new Repreca territory. My catcher has a fail-safe release mechanism. And it's still a whole month before hurricane season starts. Astrid leaned back, her eyes searching his, her hands moving from his back to his shoulders. The worry in her gaze made his chest ache that he couldn't ease her mind better. I know all that. But that doesn't make the bad feeling go away. Do you really have to go? You know I do, my heart, he said with remorse, making his voice husky. Dad specifically asked me to go with him on this trip for some last-minute training before Dragon School starts. He spent so many years all but pretending I didn't even exist that I can't turn down one of the few opportunities where I have him sort of to myself. Her beautiful eyes softened with sympathy. I know. I'm sorry for being a worrywart. I guess I just wish that I was going with you. My parents are going in their own ship, I could at least go with them and be near you. But for some reason, everyone wants me to stay home. And I don't buy the excuse of my being needed here to make sure the twins don't burn down the village. Her expression twisted up into a disgusted grimace that still somehow managed to look adorable. Hiccup chuckled and then kissed her forehead lovingly. I wasn't supposed to tell you this because your parents thought you'd be upset, but the truth is that we're also going to Berserker Island first to do some trading and they don't want you anywhere near Dager. Not after what happened the last time we were there. Astrid pulled even further away from him so she could cross her arms over her chest, her expression hardening. What, that thing with the caves? Yeah. That was nothing. He somehow refrained from rolling his eyes. Astrid, Dager knocked me out and lured you into a trap in the name of saving me to make a serious effort at getting under your skirt. I definitely think that was something. PSHHHHWWW. Astrid didn't make the same effort, her eyes rolling so hard, she probably gave herself a headache. That deranged twit found out quickly enough that I'm not to be trifled with. He's lucky I didn't actually cut off his arm with my axe. I would love to have another opportunity to hurt him some more. I know you would. And that's why our parents think it's best that you stay away from the Berserker tribe. You'd probably end up gelding him next and that wouldn't go over well. She grinned, of course. Undoubtedly. And I'd enjoy every moment of it. He shook his head, cracking his own smile. And I'd probably help hold him down for you. But since that isn't a very wise idea, you need to stay home this time. She huffed a sigh, blowing the long bangs off the left side of her face for a moment. Fine. I'll stay. Her expression fell into serious as she cupped his cheeks and jaw and held him with desperate fingers. But you promise me you'll be careful, hiccuped Haddock. Promise. I don't want to lose you because you're determined to be a hero. He cupped her delicate face in return with gentle hands. I promise I'll be careful and I won't do anything deliberately stupid. She snorted softly. That'll have to do. Tugging on his hair, she pulled him closer and plastered her mouth to his in a kiss that was more teeth than lips and kind of hurt, but he didn't care. The emotions behind her desperation had him returning the hard kiss in kind. But that didn't last for more than a minute before he was changing the slant of their mouths and easing the pressure, turning the kiss from desperate to sweet and hot. Her hands were clutching his hair now and his were, well, one was still on her back, but the other appeared to have grabbed her by the thigh to tug her closer to him so that she was straddling his lap. And since just the brush of her covered core felt like a dream against his rapidly expanding hardness, his other hand joined in, grabbing her round ass and pushing her even closer as his first hand pushed her spiked skirt up and out of the danger zone. Then that hand grabbed the other side of her ass and helped. At the jolting intimate contact they both moaned into their kiss and Hiccup was pretty sure his eyes rolled up into his head for a second. With a rock of his hips and another pull from his hands, he made them jolt together again. Hiccup practically saw stars and Astrid pulled away from the kiss to pant in air. Gods, that feels good, she managed to say between gasps. And with no further urging from his now only supporting, and very appreciative, needing hands, Astrid was rocking against him on her own. Every thrust against his aching erection had Hiccup that much closer to exploding spectacularly. And since he wanted it to last for longer than half a minute, he turned his concentration to kissing his way down Astrid's neck, determined to map the smooth and elegant length in finite detail. From experience, he already knew that he could draw some interesting sounds from her depending on where he kissed and sucked on her, but he thought now would be a good time to double-check if those trigger spots still worked. Nuzzling behind her ear with the tip of his nose as he licked just below it inspired the sexiest little hum from her that was nearly a purr, so he stayed there for a while until she was also shivering in his hold. He then kissed a slow and very thorough winding path down her neck to the spot just above the collar of her shirt that he knew was practically magic. Safe in the knowledge that her parents wouldn't see her for at least 4 days, Hiccup latched onto that spot lightly with his teeth and lips and then sucked hard, letting the pleasure of her rocking fuel the intensity of his reciprocating action. Astrid very nearly screamed out his name. And fuck, did that make him feel like a god or something. She somehow managed to ground down harder on him, their clothes getting shockingly damp between their mashed together bodies. And then she was shuddering in his arms, whimpering, yes, 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 yes. The knowledge that she'd just climaxed on top of him was more than enough for Hiccup to lose what little grasp of control he had left on himself. His head fell back and he came like a volcano in his undershorts, groaning out her name like a prayer. When the final sputters of pleasure let go of their grip on him, Hiccup panted in some much-needed air and opened his eyes to look at Astrid. She was still straddling his thighs but no longer pressed against him, and gazing back at him with pleasure-soft eyes. Her face was flushed and so beautiful, it practically took his breath again. "Babe," she whispered. Knowing exactly what she meant, he whispered back, "Yeah. We just found another way to satisfy each other that won't get her pregnant. Messy, but oh, so satisfying. Might be the best goodbye ever," he added with a crooked grin. Her eyes lit with a wicked gleam. "I bet I could do better." He gulped as various possibilities for better flashed through his suddenly depraved mind. Yeah, you probably could." He leaned forward and pressed a quick kiss to her smirking mouth and then gently deposited her back on the bed beside him. "But not now. I need to change and get back to the docks, preferably before your parents get there or my dad comes looking for me." He was already suiting action to words by yanking off his boots. Poor Hiccup. Astrid was giggling as she flopped backwards on the bed, arms stretched above her head as she wriggled on top of the thick blankets like a contented cat and closed her eyes as she hummed. Hiccup had to pause in the act of shedding his wool trousers and undershorts for a second to gawk at her, his manhood revitalizing itself by the moment at the enticing picture she presented. "Bloody hell," he muttered under his breath. "You're trying to kill me." Her eyes met his, opening a crack. "Perhaps." Then she closed them again. "I might sleep here while you're gone. Your bed smells like you. I like it." He gulped again and somehow managed to shuck his lower body clothing. "Thor. Definitely trying to kill me. Now I'll have that image in my head forever." "My bed is yours," he squeaked out as he tossed the soiled clothes into the empty woven basket in the corner. "I should hope so," she replied. Grateful that he'd just washed his laundry in the stream yesterday, Hiccup pulled out another pair of undershorts and his spare set of trousers that were fortunately identical to the ones he'd just been wearing. As he hopped around on the hardwood floor, pulling his shorts on, he happened to glance at Astrid and found her now propped up on her elbow and watching him with that amused and adoring smile she wore sometimes that made him want to kiss her. All right, everything she did made him want to kiss her, but this particular look more than anything. Flushing a little, he pushed past the automatic embarrassment and smirked, enjoying the view. She replied, smirking. Flashes of bare ass on top of skinny legs and ending in wool stockings. How could I not be? Hiccup snorted and finished dressing as quickly as he could. Which turned out to be a good thing, because only seconds after he'd finished tugging his last boot on, the door downstairs crashed open and his father was bellowing, "Hiccup. We're all ready to go and you're suspiciously absent." "Crap," the boy muttered. "I'll be right there," he bellowed back. He leaned back on the bed and smacked a quick kiss to Astrid's grinning lips. "You'd better stay here till we're gone," he whispered. "Way ahead of you, babe," she whispered back. "Remember your promise." He had to kiss her again. So he did. "I remember. I'll be back and all in one piece before you can even miss me." She grabbed his shirt in a fist and stared at him with practically glowing eyes, they were so intense. "You better." Hiccup gave her a fleeting grin and then reluctantly pulled away. Dashing to his feet, he grabbed his sword and shield from where they were leaning against the wall and shrugged into their leather holders so the weapons settled perfectly on his back. He then grabbed his parka because nights on the ocean were still bloody cold and snatched up his bag. Hiccup. I'm coming, he yelled down the stairs at his impatient parent. Before jogging down the steps, though, he turned and looked at Astrid one last time and found her standing right behind him. Geez, I didn't even hear her move. But Thor, she's perfect and she's mine. Raising a hand, he touched her cheek gently with the back of his fingers. Love you, he breathed. Astrid held his hand to her face for a moment, nuzzling into it as she murmured back, love you too. Then she pressed a kiss into his palm and let him go. He drank in her big, sky-blue eyes for one more endless second and then Hiccup turned and rushed down the stairs to undertake a journey to catch the first part of his 5-step plan. Because Hiccup was embarking on the beginning of his quest, which was to tame a dragon and learn to ride it so that he could find his mother and then convince her to come back home where she belonged. Chapter 4, UN, Timely Rescues. Chapter Text. UN, Timely Rescues. Toothless half-dozed on the last patch of the early morning sun-warmed sand before the clouds rolled in and made everything shady. His eyes were only narrow green slits as he appreciated the sight of Luna playing in the waves and catching their breakfast. With drowsy curiosity, he decided to check up on his human boy. It had been a few days since he'd last connected to the mind of Hiccup Haddock III, what a strange name, but Astrid called him that sometimes, so he figured it was overdue. He was curious to hear more about the upcoming dragon training that the boy had thought of in passing a few times, as well as something called the Mangler, which didn't sound very nice. And now that he and Luna had finally mated and his hormones were sated for the moment, Toothless wouldn't even mind if Hiccup was thinking about mating with the Astrid girl. Might even learn something new, he thought with mild intrigue. It was a simple matter now to send his mental senses flowing down the invisible bond that he'd developed with Hiccup over the last year of spying on him. Hiccup was sailing away from the island. Or more accurately, cursing their weird gods resoundingly under his breath as he sweated through the agony of rowing with muscles not used to the task. Alarmed, Toothless went from half asleep to wide awake in an instant. Because the last time Hiccup had gone sailing, he'd nearly drowned when their floating wooden craft had been destroyed by a replica dragon that Toothless had almost tracked down for the sole purpose of yelling at for endangering his human, until he realized how crazy that was. And the time before that, when Hiccup had sailed away from home last fall, he'd gone to the island that hurt to fly near and had come back feeling very sad and determined to find his missing mother. Which had made Toothless and Luna depressed too, because they knew their families would have spent a significant amount of time looking for them when they'd gotten stuck in this area as slaves to the Queen. Hiccup had also had a very ingrained image in his head of a human standing on the back of a flying dragon, which had shocked Toothless and Luna quite a lot because neither of them had ever heard of a dragon allowing a human to do such a thing. In short, they had already decided that if their young humans left the island, they would follow them and make sure they didn't get in any further trouble. There was just one problem: Luna would be delivering her eggs anytime in the next day or so. She couldn't leave the island. And he didn't want to leave her alone for the important event. Toothless jumped up to his feet and bounded to the water's edge. Luna. Hiccups left the island again. His mate popped her head up above the water and looked at him with big blue eyes. Oh, that's unfortunate timing. What should I do? That's up to you, sweetie. Oh, come on. You can't let me make this decision on my own. No matter what I pick, you're going to think it's the wrong one. Luna glided through the lake towards him, laughing softly. Water streamed off her sleek white body as she fully emerged and padded through the shallows to where he stood. She then shared the fun by giving a vigorous yet careful-looking shake. Thanks, he thought sarcastically as he blinked the water out of his eyes and shook too. You're welcome, she thought back, smirking. Then, despite the situation, they took a moment to purr at each other as she rubbed her body along his as she circled him. When she was in front of him again, Luna sat on her haunches and said, "All right. Here's my decision and I promise I won't be mad at you if it doesn't quite work out, timing-wise." Toothless sagged slightly in relief that his pregnant mate was taking charge in this instance. He had no desire whatsoever to anger or disappoint her right now. Luna continued, only smiling a little as she sensed his feelings. You have to take an offering to the Queen today anyway, so you might as well do that right away. Of course, my love. Toothless thought back eagerly. That way you should be back before anything of significance happens, since I don't quite feel like I'm going to pop yet. Oh, thank the great dragon. She smiled wider. And if you happen to hunt for the Queen's tribute in the same area as Hiccup has gone, well, so be it. Toothless nearly pounced on her with his relieved, joyful, overwhelming love, but remembered at the last millisecond that she was feeling very sensitive right now and wouldn't appreciate his enthusiasm like she usually did. So his surge forward was checked and he turned it into a gentle nuzzle against her cheek. Thank you, Luna. You're the best mate ever. She only laughed and nuzzled his cheek in return. You're not so bad either, love. Thanks. He purred louder and licked her cheek. I better get going then. Do I need to check on your human too? Luna closed her eyes for a second and then shook her head. No, I can feel her still on this island. That's good. One less human to worry about. Yes. Toothless licked her cheek one more time and then spread his wings in preparation to fly. I'll be back as soon as I can, sweetness. You're actually going to leave without eating breakfast first? Luna said with clear amusement as she regurgitated 5 fish on the sand for him. Toothless put his wings back down and laughed. Hun. I guess not. Between the cover provided by the gathering rain clouds and the really awesome ability to go invisible that Luna had shown him, Toothless had no problem following the human sailing ship without being detected. When they passed near a human-inhabited island that had a herd of sturdy yaks conveniently grazing in plain sight, Toothless left off following Hiccup to snatch up an old-looking beast and fly it to the Queen as fast as he could. In total, the trip took him a couple hours to complete and return to Hiccup's location. Thus, by the time he'd followed his bond with the boy to find him again, the 3 Viking ships had furled their sails to do some fishing with very helpful and clever nets, which Toothless had envied on more than one occasion when the fish were playing hard to catch. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Toothless scanned the skies and ocean, even going so far as to dive under the water and make a large perimeter sweep of the area around the ships to check for underwater predators, and found nothing to be concerned about. Convinced for the moment that Hiccup should be safe enough, he made the 20-minute flight back to the island of Berk and his precious Luna, whom he almost promptly flew right back away from, because she was in a cranky mood that bordered on foul as she paced their little beach as rain poured down from the sky in sheets. She was cursing him, the great dragon, and even the Viking gods for the cramps currently besieging her. Like a wise male of any species, he only stayed long enough to ask, "How long, do you think?" "I don't know. An hour or 2, maybe," she snapped back as he hovered safely out of the range of her teeth. "Then I'll be back in an hour," he promised. "I'll just go check on Hiccup one more time." "Fine. You do that." So he did, grateful that he had a really good excuse to skip this stage of the egg-laying process. He didn't remember his mother being this grumpy when his younger brothers were laid, but he hadn't exactly been hanging around to watch back then either. But when he got back to where the Vikings had stopped to fish, chaos had descended there to an even greater degree as well. The entire pod of teal and purple-colored sleequifiers that lived near Berk had decided to steal the conveniently trapped fish already caught in the nets. This meant that the boats were being pulled all over the place, the humans were screaming curses and shooting at the sleequifiers with arrows and other launchable weapons, the sleequifiers were shooting acid balls at the ships and humans, the fish were being traumatized by the now acidic water, and Hiccup was in the thick of it with a large contraption that he kept pointing at the fast-moving sea dragons while thinking to himself, one of these would work. Definitely. The fastest dragon on the water could help me search for my mom in no time. Toothless rolled his eyes to himself. Does Hiccup actually think he can catch a sleequifier and convince it to carry him around like an obedient boat? He's clearly suffering from delusions of something. The idiot's only going to get himself killed. And then his eyes widened in alarm as Hiccup actually tried to do just that by using his contraption thing to shoot a mess of weighed-down ropes at a sleequifier and actually making contact with the dragon. The ropes wrapped around its long neck. Hiccup whooped out a yes, then wound a rope that attached to all of the other ropes around a hook on the side of the ship, thus catching the now thrashing and crying dragon, an adolescent dragon who was going to strangle itself to death before he ever thought to calm down. The humans didn't see this though, they were just cheering on Hiccup for his catch, his father clapping him on the back with pride, nearly sending the boy right over the rain-slick railing with his enthusiasm. Heeding their young podmates' cries for help, the other Sleequifiers abandoned the nets and all converged on Hiccup's ship, sending shot after shot of acid at the rail of the boat and the rope, trying to free the dying dragon. The acid would have eaten through one of them eventually, but probably not fast enough. Toothless couldn't watch this atrocity anymore and not do anything. He could hear the Sleequifier in his mind, crying for help, and a fury at Hiccup for causing this grew in his chest, expelling out as a burst of blue plasma at the rope holding the Sleequifier to the ship. It broke instantly under the power of his perfectly aimed shot. The humans cried out at seeing a ball of blue flame appear from nowhere, which would have been satisfying under any other circumstances, but the trapped dragon was still tangled up in ropes that he'd somehow managed to also now have wrapped around his wings and legs. Instead of strangling, the dragon was in imminent danger of drowning. Stars above, I'm going to have a hard time forgiving Hiccup for this, Toothless growled to himself as he dove towards the ocean from his hover in the clouds above to rescue the other dragon. Hiccup, though, had also finally seen that he'd done something terribly stupid and then did something even more stupid by diving into the sea. His father screamed, "Hiccup," as the boy disappeared into the thrashing mess of dragons, nets, fish, and water. Toothless had a similar heart attack moment until the boy's head reappeared above the water. He might be displeased with Hiccup at the moment, but he was still his human. "Do not eat the human boy." Toothless roared mentally at the Sleequifiers as they surged towards easy prey, shooting bolts of acid at Hiccup as he swam valiantly towards the drowning young one. His yell caught their attention, at least, and they all looked up at him in alarm, knowing the wrath of a night fury was not something to be taken lightly. His warning was too late though, because Hiccup had cried out and faltered for a second. He just knew that Hiccup had been hit by an acid ball. But the boy then swam on, reaching the trapped dragon at the same time Toothless did. To exclamations of alarm from the watching humans, Toothless dove into the water and pulled the Sleequifier up by his gasping head, thinking that he could burn the ropes off of him. But Hiccup had also latched onto the dragon and had a shiny knife in his hand, already sawing at the ropes. Their eyes met for a moment, the boy's wide and dilated nearly to black. Toothless could feel his surprise, pain, and remorse as if it were his own along with the need to make right what he'd done. So Toothless held the dragon at the surface of the water while Hiccup worked around the still writhing body, cutting him free with frantic saws of the sharp knife. It didn't take more than a minute, but for Toothless, it felt like an eternity. He could hear the other humans having panic attacks on their boats, the words, "Night Fury," sounding over and over. He could hear the mental murmurs from the other Sleequifiers as they watched with concern and amazement as a human went out of their way to help a dragon for the first time that any of them knew of. And he could see, even through the water, that Hiccup's lower left leg was literally disintegrating from the acid that was eating through his flesh, and would continue to burn painfully until it finished its path all the way through his calf, bones and all. Through their bond, that in hindsight he realized he should have probably closed off, Toothless felt every agonizing second of it. The instant that the Sleequifier was freed from his rope cage, Toothless let him go and grabbed Hiccup by the shoulders instead, knowing that Hiccup was rapidly running out of strength and would never be able to swim back to his boat. This caused the boy's father to yell in alarm again, but Toothless ignored him. He looked down at the boy as he flew them upwards a little so Hiccup was out of the water. And then, for the first time ever, he deliberately pushed his thoughts into a human's mind. "This is going to hurt something awful, but it's for the best." "What?" Hiccup thought back at the same time that Toothless shot a ball of plasma at Hiccup's leg, cancelling out the acid with superior plasma and breaking the already weakened bone off just below the knee in one clean shot. He then immediately spit a weaker blue flame at the leg to cauterize the entire mess into a smooth, blackened stump to stop the bleeding. During that terrible procedure, Hiccup screamed, looked at his leg, vomited, and fainted. Toothless nearly passed out too from the echo of agony through their connection, but determinedly pushed past it. "Drop my son, you evil beast from hell," was the only warning Toothless got before he heard the distinctive sound of a bladed weapon sailing through the air. Toothless darted upwards, fast enough to avoid the axe that would have landed in his neck, but it caught his tail instead, ripping through the left tail fin with agonizing results. Now feeling way more pain than ever in his entire life, Toothless went into survival mode, which meant flying away from the humans as fast as possible as he still clutched Hiccup in his claws. Except, his tail wasn't working properly, and he couldn't get any height. Toothless flapped and flapped his wings, but he ended up in the water as well, waking up Hiccup, who sputtered right along with Toothless as they crashed into the ocean ungracefully. He spread his wings to keep from sinking, and grabbed Hiccup's shirt in his teeth so the boy didn't end up drowning underneath of him, but that was as far as he got in terms of rescuing them. He kicked his legs and tried to swim, but that just left him floundering more. How one injury to his tail could cause such a complete breakdown of his ability to do anything, he had no idea, but it was an apparent fact. His efforts had taken him too far away from the human boats for immediate rescue as well, but he could hear the slap of many oars in the water making a determined effort to reach them, so Toothless came to the wincing conclusion that the only way to survive this was to let the humans come rescue him. Or at least Hiccup. He was most likely going to be slaughtered. "I'm sorry, Luna." "What? What's wrong?" she thought back, her mental voice faint at this distance, but surprisingly there. "Did something stupid?" he answered. "What else would you call putting one's life in danger for the sake of a dragon-murdering human?" Granted, Hiccup had then tried to fix it, but still. Toothless. He was going to explain further, he really was, but Hiccup struggled in his mouth, trying to turn around, saying, "Let me go, dragon, please." So Toothless did. Hiccup used his leg and a half to feebly tread water, turning and grabbing Toothless' face, staring into his eyes. His normally pale skin was turning an angry red in reaction to all the acid he'd been swimming through. "Did you really talk to me? Or am I losing my mind?" Toothless closed his eyes for a moment and then nodded once in the boy's grasp. "I did." "You are not crazy." "Holy Thor." Hiccup breathed, rain and sweat dripping down his face, hands caressing his head now in a pleasant way. "I can't believe it. You can talk." "Well, sort of," he added with a crooked smile, all pain temporarily forgotten in the moment. "Yes, I can talk," Toothless thought back wryly. "At least until your sire decides to gut me just for existing, if taking your leg off the faster way wasn't incentive enough." Hiccup winced. "Not on my watch, he's not," a mental roar cut into Toothless' mind. He looked up and back just in time to see a massive brown Storacutter dive towards them, all four wings tucked into his body and a human figure dressed in brown and teal armor riding his back. Hiccup followed his line of sight and his eyes widened to nearly popping out proportions. "Mom," he gasped. "Mom." Toothless just had time to think before the Storacutter was scooping him out of the water. Out of reflex, Toothless grabbed Hiccup again in turn. And then they were soaring off into the rain with roaring echoes of Hiccup bouncing off the clouds. The Storacutter, who suddenly had four blurry heads, looked down at Toothless and grinned crookedly. "Hi. I'm Cloudjumper and I'm your rescue dragon today." Toothless grinned back and then promptly fainted, blood loss, pain, and stress catching up to him all at once. Fortunately, the Storacutter quickly caught Hiccup when Toothless unknowingly let him go. Chapter 5, of Misery and Men. Chapter text. Of Misery and Men. Previously, back on Berk. Astrid hadn't meant to nap for more than a half hour or so, but when she woke up to the shifted shadows in Hiccup's rooming telling a tale of hours instead, she cursed at the lost time. Daylight was precious, after all, in a land where the sun didn't even rise for weeks in the middle of winter. Her torpid indulgence was all her fiancé's fault, of course, thanks to them staying up nearly all night, talking and snuggling. Okay, maybe she was equally to blame. One double-sided consolation was that she woke up with her arms wrapped around Hiccup's pillow and surrounded by his musky boy scent thanks to his probably due for a wash bedding. It was pleasant, but not as comforting as waking up in his arms would have been. What wasn't pleasant was the low-level ache in her core that said Mother Nature was going to be very mean to her starting very soon. Which was strange, considering she wasn't due for another monthly curse for at least a week. But who knew sometimes with these things? Astrid muttered as she flopped over onto her back and gave the ceiling an epic glare she hoped pierced all the way up to the realm of the gods. Because surely this was their fault. First I get left behind, and now I have to be miserable physically too. What did I ever do to you? Of course, the gods didn't answer. After a few moments of waiting anyway, she talked herself into moving. Better go make sure the village is still standing. And find more of that nice absorbent moss, since I'm almost out. Don't want to have to resort to sheep wool again. Thor, that stuff stinks when it gets wet. Groaning, Astrid rolled herself into a sitting position and then pulled on her boots before standing. Next, she buckled on her studded leather battle skirt, shrugged into the sheath that held her axe, checked all the various hiding spots on her body for her arsenal of knives, and finished by rebraiding her thoroughly mussed hair into a thick tail that hung over her shoulder. She was ready to face the world again as a Viking warrioress. And what with her already missing Hiccup and the ache in her core, Astrid dared the world, or even just the twins, to make her mad right now. But when she walked out of Hiccup's house, the village was still standing, people were calmly if quickly going about their business as afternoon storm clouds rolled in, there were no enemy fleets sailing into the harbor, and the twins, in particular, were nowhere in sight. Hun. Almost amused by her anticipation of doom and not finding any, Astrid shrugged and turned up the hill and towards the bridge that led to the bigger part of the island and the forest where green things grew. Straight to moss hunting then. And maybe I'll scare up a rabbit or four for dinner. Yeah. That sounds good. Haven't had rabbit stew for a while. And I'm sure the rest of the village would enjoy it as well. Make up for not being helpful all morning. But Astrid hadn't been in the forest for more than 15 minutes, only finding a couple handfuls of good, dryish moss so far that would actually be absorbent, thanks to yesterday's rain, when something entirely new and very disturbing distracted her. By all the stars in the sky, Toothless, I'm going to burn off your favorite parts when you get back. Astrid froze at the feminine but very pissed off voice, faint, but clear. Who said that? She scanned the trees around her, seeing no one. Her eyes narrowed and she reached up to grab her axe as she peered into every shadow. Ugh. This hurts. Why do females go through this? Why don't the males ever have to experience the painful things? Astrid, reminded of the increasing ache in her belly that she'd been steadfastly ignoring, sympathized. Hello. Where are you? Still no answer from the area around her. Astrid started stalking through the trees, searching now for someone, perhaps hurt, nearby. Stupid mating instincts, driving me to this. I swear I'm ignoring them from now on. These are the only eggs Toothless is ever getting from me. Astrid froze again. What the hell? Eggs? What kind of human talks like that? Oh, gronkle droppings. I was projecting, wasn't I? These words were much louder than the previous statements had been. It was at this point that Astrid finally realized the female voice was coming from inside her head and not from afar. Her first instinct would normally have been to freak out. Probably. But Astrid was in just enough pain and just tired enough to skip that stage and go straight to replying back with loud thoughts, yeah. I can hear you. Are you a goddess? The voice in her head laughed bitterly. Stars, no. If I were, do you think I'd be enduring these awful contractions if I was? You mean monthly curse pain? The female laughed again, not so bitterly this time. No, no, thank the great dragon I don't have to deal with that. And I'm glad. I've felt yours and that's more than enough for me. No, this is egg-laying pain. Astrid blinked at that. You're not human, are you? No, the voice laughed again, and then gasped at a wave of pain that Astrid definitely felt with her. The girl doubled over, holding her stomach, and realizing that the pain she'd been feeling for the past hour or so probably hadn't been hers at all. Thor. Is this what childbirth feels like? I don't know about you humans, but this is definitely what laying an egg feels like, the female groaned. Astrid managed to stand upright again as the pain eased off. Bloody hell, I might not be having any kids then, if it's as bad as that. Hiccup might object to that. Astrid's eyebrows rose, her feet moving of their own accord through the forest now and even further away from the village. She felt drawn to find the body belonging to the voice. You know who Hiccup is? Of course. You think about him all the time. Normally, Astrid would be pissed at the implication that the owner of the voice was listening to her thoughts often enough to know this, but she was too intrigued with the puzzle yet to get to that stage. Maybe later. Probably. Depending on who the voice belonged to. She still wasn't ruling out a fallen Norse goddess or Valkyrie or something. Who was laying eggs? But who knew what those gods got up to? That's true. I do. She paused, thinking back on what she'd first heard the voice say. So, your mate's name is Toothless? Yeah. Astrid could hear the affection in the word, completely belying her earlier vow to essentially geld her partner. Is he actually toothless? Cause that sounds kind of wimpy. She sniggered quietly to herself at the thought, her quickening strides bringing her out of the forest and overlooking the sea. No, he's not, the voice giggled, then gasped again. Astrid grimaced at the telegraphed pain, but had a much easier time ignoring it now that she knew it wasn't hers. Just like she was ignoring the first drops of rain falling from the now completely overcast sky. He has rows of nice, sharp teeth, but they're retractable, just like mine. Bloody hell, as you humans like to say, why does it have to rain too? Now I'm going to have to move into the cave instead of staying in the nice sand by the lake. His parents just had questionable taste in names, is all. Though I do think it's very cute and somehow suits him. He's very sweet, considering he's supposed to be the most fearsome thing in the skies. I see. And she was. Astrid was starting to get a very broad hint of what she was going to find when she found the owner of the voice. And it wasn't going to be a human-shaped goddess. Whatever it was, though, she was now almost positive was on the island of Berk as well. Astrid turned south, heading even further away from her village and towards one of the few hard-to-reach locations on the island. There was a small cove near Raven's Point that no one had bothered to try and make a path into as far as Astrid knew. But, if she were wanting to hide out on the island, that's where she'd go. And she happened to know for a fact that it had a small lake. And, it wasn't far from where she currently was. It was a perfect place for something with wings that liked to eat fish to make a home. What other distinguishing features does your mate have that you find cute? Astrid asked as she started jogging, hoping to confirm her suspicions without sounding too curious. Her well-honed hunter's instincts had been awakened and prey had been spotted. Sort of. If Hiccup couldn't catch a dragon to tame, then maybe she could. This one sounded vulnerable right now and everything. Not that she had any rope with her, but maybe she wouldn't need it. Was it possible to make friends with a telepathic dragon? Or maybe even start from scratch with a baby dragon? The voice in her head was obviously preoccupied with her current state of egg-laying, so she wasn't hearing anything other than what Astrid was thinking loudly, which was good, all things considered. Oh, my toothless has the most beautiful green eyes, the voice said in a besotted tone that Astrid recognized well. From herself. So does my Hiccup. And he draws the most adorable pictures of myself in the sand. Wait. Dragons can draw. She hadn't meant to say that word yet. Oops. You figured it out. I'm not surprised. I always knew you were a smart human. It's why I picked you. Astrid beamed to herself at the praise, as weird as it sounded to be grateful for the good opinion of a man-eating, sheep-stealing dragon. And yes, Toothless can draw like a human. Sort of. Egg-laying sucks. I definitely don't recommend reproducing. He's probably the smartest dragon in the world. I've never seen a dragon draw before him. Hun. Hiccup is good at drawing too, and he's way smarter than most humans. Sounds like our males would be good friends. And I'm definitely taking your advice under consideration. I can feel how much it hurts you. Sorry, Astrid. I don't have much control of my telepathy right now, and we're connected because I've been watching you for a while. And, you're right about our males. Toothless watches over Hiccup. That's where he is right now, in fact. Astrid basically stumbled to a stop at the top edge of the cove with shock and looked down at the blurry lake, mostly obscured by the now driving rain soaking her to the skin. What do you mean we're connected? Like permanently bonded? I never asked for that. She started looking for a way down, circling the top of the indentation in the earth. Oh. Not permanently. Not if you don't want to be. I'm sorry if you feel intruded upon. Toothless and I were just curious about you humans, and one thing led to another, and now we sort of consider you two as ours. We can stop if you wish. The voice sounded extremely sad about the idea, and Astrid found the concept of not talking to this very interesting dragon again depressing. No. No. Please, don't leave me. I think I like you. She nearly cheered when she spotted a tiny break in the rock wall surrounding the cove and made for it with all haste, slicing tree branches out of her way as needed with her axe and skidding down the steep, rain-slick slope in a barely controlled slide. Oh. Good. Because I like you too, Astrid. Ah. I think the first egg is coming out. Eep. Hang on. I'm almost there. You are? Of course you are. Ah. Okay. That's 1. Stars, that feels a little better. My goodness, am I ever out of it to not notice what you were doing? Yeah. I figured as much. All right. I'm down in the cove by the lake. Where are you? Cave. East wall, about a human's height above the ground level. I see it. I'll be there in a minute. Okay. Putting action to words, Astrid sprinted through the rain around the edge of the small lake and under the waterfall that sprang from the rock walls and fed the freshwater haven. The dark impression in the east wall became clearer with each step until she was right below it. Without even stopping, and giving a running grunt, she leapt up and grabbed the edge, pulling herself up with practiced ease. And then she was in the cave. The very dark cave. Without a light. With a dragon. Who might have just lured her here as dinner. If her voice came out a little tentative and she gripped her axe a little tighter, could anyone really blame her? Hello. I'm here. I see that. Come on in. It's much nicer out of the rain, isn't it? Yes. Astrid took a few careful steps forward, ears straining for the slightest sound of possible attack. A claw on the rock. A slithering noise. A hiss. Anything. It took all of those few steps, but when she did finally hear something, it sounded like a pained moan. One that echoed the telegraphed pain in her mid-region. She didn't relax exactly, but Astrid felt slightly more confident to continue. Where are you? Oh. My apologies. I didn't realize you had poor night vision. Hang on. Astrid heard a feline-sounding grunt, which was followed by what sounded like the rustling of wings and then the nearly silent patter of carefully placed feet. And then a long inhale, followed by a burst of purplish-blue plasma flames that showed the outline of a very sleek, pale dragon as she turned in a few circles and superheated the rock floor around her, casting everything with a purple glow that faded to just red as she ceased spewing flame. The dragon looked down at Astrid with wide, gentle eyes that glowed reddish-purple in the current light but she had no doubt were another color entirely. Hello Astrid. I'm Luna. It's nice to finally meet you face to face. Astrid gawked up at the beautiful creature standing in the center of the glowing rock, a black egg the size of a bread loaf just outside the circle and supported by a nest of sand. 2 more nests were ready and waiting for their deliveries. Luna was unlike any dragon she'd ever seen, with the possible exception of the outline of the Night Fury caught against the moon one night a long time ago. With awe filling her chest, Astrid sheathed her axe on her back and took a couple steps forward, hands out, showing she wasn't planning on being a threat to the new mother dragon. You're gorgeous, she breathed. Luna made a chuffing sound that definitely sounded like laughter as well as laughing in her mind. I suppose. Now, Toothless, he's gorgeous. I look just like every other Light Fury. Is that what you're called? Astrid took a few more steps closer as Luna settled back down on the warm rocks on her stomach, curling her legs under her like a huge cat and keeping her long, elegant wings tucked close to her body. The only thing she didn't tuck in tight was her finned tail, which she curled carefully around her first egg instead. Yes. And Toothless is a Night Fury. Black as a moonless sky and with a heart as big as the ocean. You'll like him too, I'm sure. I'm sure, too, Astrid said, taking the last couple steps to the edge of the glowing rock, which she didn't dare step on, not willing to burn her feet, even with leather boots on. Anyone who takes time to watch over Hiccup is definitely going to be a friend of mine. Thank you for letting me be here for this. The white dragoness smiled at her, no question, showing her a large mouth currently devoid of teeth. Oh, I don't mind. I like the company. Normally, all the females in my herd would be here as support for my first egg laying, but there's only Toothless and I now, and he's off playing watch dragon to your mate. He'd much rather do that than endure my bad mood. Astrid recalled the things she'd first heard Luna say in her head, as well as all the times she'd seen husbands and sons evacuate a house with all haste whenever a woman was going through childbirth or even just having a bad day and had to laugh. I understand. Boys of any species are just cowards when it comes to female stuff. Exactly. And then Luna's grin turned to a grimace as another wave of pain swept through her, her entire body tensing and rippling. The next one will be soon, I think. Well, I'm not going anywhere. Astrid emphasized this by sitting her soaking wet body down cross-legged on the rock, smiling gratefully at the residual warmth that warmed her backside. Thank you. Luna stretched her neck and rested her chin on Astrid's knee, closing her eyes in a show of trust, making the girl catch her breath in surprise. She raised her hand slowly. Can I? Luna opened her eyes, inquiry in them, clear to see. Astrid gathered her courage again and finished her sentence. Can I touch you? Luna nodded slightly, her eyes sliding half-closed as she watched Astrid's slow approach. But then, finally, she was touching the top of the dragon's short snout and it was like a little bit of magic settled in her heart at the rightness of it. Luna rumbled out a soft-sounding purr and her eyes closed all the way as Astrid explored the dragon's face with gentle fingers, up and down the front of her slickly scaled nose in between her large eyes, to up her forehead and around her ears. Wow, Astrid breathed reverently. I never thought I'd be touching a dragon like this. Ever. Skinning one, maybe, but not petting one. I'm glad you're not skinning me, Luna chuffed teasingly, eyes slitting back open a little. Astrid was pretty sure they were blue, below the red glow that covered everything. I'm afraid I wouldn't react well to that. Astrid's hand stilled on the dragon's cheek. I promise, I will never harm a dragon that doesn't try to hurt me first. Luna's eyes closed and another short purr emerged just before it turned into a semi-swallowed whimper of pain. That is an acceptable promise. They sat in the peaceful dark for a few moments, just enjoying each other's company, when suddenly Luna tensed and shot up to her feet, her eyes looking suddenly wild and very afraid. Astrid bounded up to hers as well, hand settling on her axe in case danger was coming. What? What is it? It took Luna way too long to answer, an eternity of breathless seconds, her gaze now far away as if she were looking right through the rock walls, but when she did, Astrid felt her heart simultaneously sink down to her toes as well as lodge in her throat. Hiccup did something stupid. Toothless did something stupider. Then Toothless had to burn off Hiccup's lower leg to save him from worse pain and now they are both hurting and in trouble and... Luna flinched. Hard. And now Hiccup's sire just cut off a piece of Toothless' tail and he can't fly. Great dragon, help them. Astrid swayed on her feet, feeling faint. This is why Hiccup is never going anywhere without me ever again. Luna exhaled loudly, drawing Astrid's attention, and meeting her blurry, why is everything blurry, gaze with eyes shining with hope now instead of flat with fear. Someone saved them. Astorakata and Hiccup's mother, apparently. Astrid sat back down in a graceless heap as her legs gave out with relief and further shock. Luna basically did the same. Oh, thank Thor, the girl gasped out through lungs that hurt from not breathing. When Hiccup gets back, I'm so killing him for being an idiot. Same. But Toothless, I mean, Luna huffed with a burst of heat that Astrid frankly welcomed, her body starting to shiver from cold and the adrenaline crash. The glowing rock floor was starting to look very inviting. Then the poor dragoness winced as her pregnant body made itself known again and Astrid boldly reached over to stroke her neck soothingly. Don't worry. We'll get you through this and then we'll be waiting for our boys to come home with a few surprises waiting for them. Luna turned her head and licked Astrid's hand. Yes, we will, my friend. Chapter 6, A Rainy Reunion, Part 1. Chapter Text. A Rainy Reunion, Part 1. This is officially the craziest day of my life, Hiccup thought as he fell back towards the ocean. He couldn't really call it the worst, considering how well it had started off with Astrid, and his father had been enthusiastic about his dragon catcher weapon, so, crazy was going to have to suffice as a description. Above him, the night fury that could talk telepathically was held in the claws of a huge brown Storakata, and above that, the horned helmet of his mother, at least, he hoped it was his mother, was peering over the side of the dragon she was riding. It was quite a sight to die to. Because, of course, Hiccup didn't expect to survive yet another dunking in the ocean. Not while missing half a leg, already half hypothermic, and feeling completely drained of energy and strength. The Storacutter, though, had no intentions of letting Hiccup drown, as he dove almost immediately after him, wings tight to his body. The armored person kneeling on top of him grabbed onto the horned head frills to stay with the sudden motion. Hiccup's eyes widened as the dragon's sharp teeth became all could see just before he was caught by his soggy vest and tunic in the tight grip of deadly but oh so careful teeth. Gotcha, came the clear thought in Hiccup's head at the same time by a deeper mental voice than the Night Fury had. Hiccup stared into the warm yellow eyes that were peering down at him from only inches away as they leveled out and then started flying higher again. He gulped and gave the only answer he could. Thanks. The Storacutter's mouth widened into a grin around his teeth and Hiccup's clothes. You're welcome. Now, up you go. Before Hiccup could do more than think, what? He was being flung back up into the sky with a flick of the dragon's head. If he screamed, ah, and squeezed his eyes shut for a couple seconds, surely that was perfectly understandable. Hiccup landed on the back of the dragon, two human hands instantly steadying him, and a soft, husky voice saying, easy made his eyes pop open again. As his heart pounded frantically and the adrenaline rush momentarily warmed his sluggish blood, the startled boy stared right into the eye slits of the turquoise mask, adorned with 8 intimidating horns, and thought he saw the gleam of blue deep within. Ignoring the fact that he was still feeling nauseous and shaky from the loss of his leg, was soaked and shivering from being in the ocean too long, and how the wind and rain was whipping past his face at speeds he'd never felt before because he was flying on the back of a dragon. Hiccup reached up and touched the cheek of the mask tentatively. Are you my mother? Is your name Valka? He heard her gasp behind her mask as she froze, chest stilling within her armor as she even stopped breathing. And then, in slow motion, she raised a visibly shaking hand and pushed the mask off her head, hanging onto it with a white-knuckled grip, revealing a face that Hiccup knew well from the painting that hung above his father's bed. She was so much more beautiful in real life, so real, and so much more shocking to see than the glimpse of her he'd caught in the dark last year. Hiccup felt like fish legs might as well be sitting on his chest with how much everything in the region of his torso hurt. My mother was alive. Alive. All these years. Alive. And she stayed away from us on purpose. Hiccup would likely be having some very emphatic words with her about that later, but for now, all he could do was stare and rejoice that he'd found her. Or she'd found him, whatever. Maybe I can convince her to come home. Dad will surely freak out. I know he still misses her like crazy. Her eyes were wide, stormy blue, and swimming with tears as she stared back at him like she couldn't quite believe he was real. He completely understood. Yes. I'm Valka, she whispered, just barely audible over the rushing of the wind. She touched his face with her free hand, still trembling, tracing his features slowly from his eyebrows, to his nose, to his cheek, to the tiny, almost invisible scar on his chin, and finally fingered one of the drenched braids Astrid had put in his hair, exactly the same shade of auburn as hers. Look at you, my wee Hiccup, so grown up now. So brave. He didn't feel particularly grown up or brave at the moment, sitting motionless and trembling just as much as she was, while also being marginally aware of the danger of his position on the back of a powerful dragon. Mostly because he wanted to hang on to her indefinitely and bawl like a baby at finally meeting her for real for the first time in his conscious memory. He lasted all of a handful of seconds while he gulped back a sob before he couldn't hold himself back anymore. Hiccup threw himself forward and hugged her as hard as he could, tears leaking from his eyes as he buried his face in her armored shoulder. A broken cry of "Mom" was muffled by it but still heard. She stiffened in his hold for a moment, surprised and not knowing what to do at first, but then she sighed into his hair and her arms wrapped around him in return, holding him just as tight as she whispered back, "Hiccup. My son." Hiccup had imagined this moment, more or less. They definitely weren't flying through the clouds in his dreams, for as long as he could remember, wanting so much to have a mother to call his own. And now that it was true, he never wanted to let her go, so for now, he didn't, clinging to her while the Storacutter flew them far away from his father and everything that he knew. He had questions, so many questions, about why she'd stayed away and where she'd been and how had she tamed the dragon and how had she made her armor and so on, but they could wait for now. Simply being held by her as his tears accumulated on her shoulder was enough for now. Hiccup fell asleep like that, exhausted and feeling safe on the back of a dragon even though his entire upbringing said he should be terrified. Toothless. Toothless. Can you hear me? Are you awake yet? Come on, Toothless, wake up and tell me you're okay. I can't take this kind of stress right now. The constant ringing of his mate's voice in his mind, even faint as it was due to the distance between them was impossible to ignore, so. Toothless woke up to the sight of clouds as his rescue dragon soared effortless through them. He immediately closed his eyes as another wave of dizziness sought to overwhelm him again. As Luna's words replayed through his mind, he immediately winced because he knew how much trouble he was going to be in. And then he winced again at the equally insistent and just as unignorable throbbing pain in his tail. At least the ache in his tail would fade eventually once the missing part grew back. Thank the great dragon he was a reptile with regenerative capabilities. On the other wing, he was fairly certain Luna would remind him of his own failings for years to come. What kind of idiot leaves their pregnant mate behind just to protect a human? Myself, apparently. I'm awake, my beautiful, caring, moondrop of a heart mate, he sent in reassurance, hoping extra endearments would help his case. The dry, unamused, "Oh, good." Finally he received in reply told him otherwise. Toothless winced again. I'm sorry, Luna. I'll be back as soon as I can. Are you okay? How's the egg laying going? At least this time, when she answered, her tone was warmer. That would be good. I'm resting now. And it went. I just laid the last egg. We have 3 perfect eggs to watch hatch in a few days. If Toothless wasn't currently being carried by a stranger, Cloudjumper, his hazy brain helpfully supplied, and feeling like, well, like he'd just lost a chunk of a very important appendage, he would have whooped and done a few loops around the clouds. But he was and he did, so, instead he managed a smile and a very fond and sincere, "That's wonderful, darling. I can't wait to see them. And you? I can't wait to see you and show my appreciation for all your hard work." Luna laughed at that even as her mental voice became fainter as Cloudjumper flew them further and further apart. Good try, Toothless Night Fury, but I'm still going to make you take care of the children all by yourself for a month straight to make this up to me. Honestly, that was better than he was expecting. At least she wasn't going to give him the silent treatment, because he really hated that. No problem, sweetie. I'll cherish every moment. Luna snorted in disbelief that he reluctantly admitted was probably semi-accurate if watching over his little brothers was anything to go by. But there was no question that he would love and adore his children no matter how much they disturbed his sleep or amount of trouble they caused. On another note, any guesses as to when you'll be able to fly home? How badly was your tail injured? Those were good questions. And ones that Toothless was also curious about. To start with, he craned his neck around and curved his tail towards his face. That turned out to be a bad idea, because the sight of his missing fin and the streaks of red blood that covered the long point and other fin made him want to heave up every meal he'd eaten in the last week. It was only by quickly turning his head away and through some dedicated deep breathing that Toothless managed to keep his breakfast where it belonged. Toothless. He'd been quiet too long. Yeah. I'm okay. Just, assessing. All right. She didn't sound convinced. So what did you conclude? Toothless swallowed hard. She wasn't going to like this. He'd never had to regrow a body part before, but he'd heard the stories about the time his great-uncle had been caught in a human trap and had lost a foot in the process. It had taken 2 months to fully grow back. A tail fin was much less complicated, but still vital to his ability to fly. And swim, apparently. Who knew? Well, I've lost an entire fin, so, best guess is at least 2 weeks to grow it back. But maybe I can talk my rescue dragon into carrying me home sooner. That would be good. I miss you already. I miss you too, my moonlit queen. And oh, how he did. Toothless would give a lot, the other half of his tail fins even, because why not at this point, to be home with his precious mate right now, snuggled up against her side as he stared in awe at the eggs that she'd made for him. I'll be home as soon as, actually, he had no idea where they were even headed other than away from his home island that the humans called Berk. Even the sun was missing due to the thick cloud cover and steady rain they were flying through. Hang on. I'm going to ask where we're even going. Sure. And ask if your savior is willing to detour back towards me while you're at it. I can barely hear you now. Of course, love. Just give me a minute. Valka held her beautiful, injured, courageous, sleeping son in her arms and felt 15 years worth of regret crushing her heart in a punishing vice that she wasn't sure would ever let go and felt was highly deserved. She'd stayed away because she'd firmly believed that she'd never be able to teach her Viking clan to live in harmony with dragons, not when they were so set in their ways. And every time that she'd thought about returning, a day or two of spying on Berk and their dragon-killing ways, they even built an arena to capture and torture the poor things just so the children could learn to kill them faster, would persuade her that she was still making the correct decision. But here was Hiccup, her precious son, proving that not all Vikings had hearts made of stone in regards to the sentient winged beings. He'd risked his life to save a Sleequifier caught in a net of rope. And then a Night Fury, one of the rarest and most dangerous dragons of all, had risked his own life to save Hiccup's. She honestly hadn't believed her own eyes. It was Cloudjumper who'd taken the initiative to save the Night Fury and Hiccup all on his own because she'd been in such a state of wonder and shock. Gods, she loved her dragon. Which means that she'd been wrong to stay away. Hiccup, at least, was capable of working with dragons instead of against them, and she'd been wrong. I should have gone home. For Hiccup's sake, if for nothing else. Why didn't I even try? Valka. Cloudjumper interrupted her self-flagellation, sending feelings of regret along with his mental voice. She tipped her head up to the rain, letting the precipitation wash away the tears on her face, and just now noticing that her dragon was hovering in place instead of flying them towards Sanctuary. What is it, Cloudjumper? First, I'm sorry I took you away from your family all those years ago. And second, we have a small problem with our Night Fury. Valka blinked away the frigid water sitting on her eyelashes as she tipped her head down again to watch Hiccup sleep in her lap, snug in the ragged red cape that she'd wrapped around him. Her shoulders heaved with a heavy sigh as she thought back to her best friend. No. Don't be sorry. I undoubtedly would have left Stoic soon enough because I couldn't bear how he viewed dragons as nothing more than pests to be killed. But I would have taken Hiccup with me, so there's that. See. My apology was justified. I suppose. Don't fret over it, though. One of us drowning in guilt is more than enough. As you wish. I will endeavor to believe that what I did was for the better good of everyone concerned in the long run. Valka reached back and stroked a grateful hand along Cloudjumper's neck, knowing he'd feel it despite his thick, protective scales. And that is undoubtedly true. Just look at how many dragons we've rescued together over the years. I couldn't have done it without you. Cloudjumper let out a pleased rumble that was felt and heard and even above the pitter-patter of rain on his scales and her armor. Very true. And speaking of rescuing other dragons, our current project wants me to take him back to his home instead of to Sanctuary, even though that will leave him in the territory of the Red Death and under her thrall. Valka's eyebrows rose at that as she resisted the urge to displace Hiccup and lean over the side of Cloudjumper so she could look at the Night Fury with a very pointed expression of dubious disbelief. Even though you explained that he'd be safe from that wretched queen and that our alpha could break her hold on him and that he would then be free. Yes. And you explained that I could help heal his tail. Yes. Did you tell him that we have a whole flock of Night Furies on Sanctuary? I did. He was very excited about that, especially since it turns out that this is Toothless, the missing son of Longwing and Ebony. Valka startled at that and then smiled to herself a little. Of course he is, considering the relative closeness to where we found his family. If he was enthralled by the Red Death, that explains why he never returned home. Exactly. Toothless said he would gladly welcome the chance to be free of the Red Death and come for a visit to Sanctuary in the near future, but first he has to go home. Why? His mate, of course. She just laid her first ever clutch of eggs while he was saving Hiccup, whom Toothless is bonded to, by the way, and he says if he doesn't go home to her immediately, she'd likely never forgive him. Now Valka really wanted to lean down and look at the Night Fury, just to see the expression on his face and to show him her own expression of surprise, but she once again refrained for Hiccup's sake. Oh dear. I suppose we're going back the way we came then. I hoped you'd say that, Cloudjumper thought as he turned himself around and started flying somewhat slower than normal through the grey rain clouds. Why do I hear a but in there? She asked suspiciously. Because you know me too well, my friend, and because Toothless lives on Berk. Valka froze at the wince-filled ending of that statement, once again not breathing as she dealt with the trepidation and stressful thoughts of returning to her home island and possibly her husband for the first time in 15 years. But once she got over that, she just had to look at this night fury that had bonded himself to her son. Valka settled Hiccup in the safe place between Cloudjumper's wings, and then she hooked her staff on one of his strong horns so she could lean down and out over his side. Toothless looked up at her with surprise in his green eyes at the movement. Seriously, she said to the dragon clutched carefully in Cloudjumper's hind claws. You willingly chose to live on Berk with Stoic the Vast, dragon hater and killer. Toothless grinned gummily at her, his tongue lolling out a little. Yes, Hiccup's mother known as Valka, I did. Nesting right under his nose and maybe occasionally stealing his sheep is vastly satisfying. Valka gawked at the cheeky young dragon for a moment and then she laughed loud and long before shaking her head at him. I like you, Toothless Night Fury, and I'm very glad you've chosen to look out for my son. The mirth faded a little from Toothless' eyes as he tilted his head solemnly at her. It is my privilege to do so. Hiccup and his mate are unique amongst his clan, and now that I've met you, I understand why. Thank you, Valka whispered, tears gathering in her eyes once again at the knowledge that Hiccup was loved so well. This was going to be a very emotional day.